This is the Leon Charney Report. And now, here is your host, Leon Charney.
Hi, I'm Leon Charney, and this is the Leon Charney Report. And I don't believe in the history of this show we had such an outpouring for people who wanted to purchase tapes of our David Hartman interview. You might recall we played it about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and David Hartman is head of the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, Israel. We're televising tonight from from Jerusalem, Israel, in David Hartman's apartment, and we thought in order to give you people another treat, this is part 2, I said before, it's not Godfather Rambo, it's part 2 of the Hartman tapes. And we felt we should get some more wisdom out of David Hartman while we're in Israel. So you're going to be lucky, and I'll be happy, and you'll all be stimulated. David, welcome to the show again.
Shalom.
You're a man of great philosophy. Any significance to the fact that today is Christmas and Hanukkah?
Yeah, well, it's the day when I think in some way for Christians it's a very important spiritual day. And for Jews it's a very important holiday because it represents for them the courage of a people to fight for freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. See, you could have a Torah, but if you're not prepared to fight for it, then in some way you lose it. And therefore Hanukkah was in some way the revolt of the community against the imposition of pagan culture on their lives. Imposing forms of worship which were alien to their tradition, excluding them from observing the Sabbath and from learning Torah and from living according to the rituals of their spiritual, heritage. And to fight for that and to be strong enough to say no to pagan imposition is crucially necessary if you're to build a spiritual culture. In other words, a human being, if he's not prepared to fight for his values, loses them.
All right, let's get a little deeper. Why were people against the Jews? Because their mores were different, their culture was different, they couldn't understand it, it was stupidity, it was arrogance, it was, what was it?
Well, it's all of them. I mean, sometimes despots can't tolerate Jewish difference. In other words, there's a sense in which tyranny grows from people who are frightened of the other. And in some way, Jews were the permanent other in history, the permanent stranger,
right,
whose ways of life, whose forms of food, whose whole spiritual structure was in some way totally different. And therefore, worshipping a God that cannot be seen. And there was also a certain arrogant pride that the Jews carried their lives with. In other words, there was a sense that they were aristocrats who were inheritors of a profound spiritual tradition. And they felt in some way their lives and the type of quality of their lives was an expression of God's deepest desire for humanity. And that feeling of election and aristocracy created a feeling for others, and therefore this is not a people who could easily be manipulated, people who could easily be subject, and therefore there's always a danger when you have a dignified minority group in your midst.
All right, march me forward now to Nazi Germany. And
well, Hitler in some way...
The same theory?
Hitler could not in some way triumph in his racist theory as long as Jews were there. Stalin could not achieve his self-deification. You can't create an idolatrous culture in which the state is given absolute allegiance and absolute power. You can't create the deification of a political leader who becomes above criticism as long as there are Jews. Jews do not bow down to false gods. The thing that characterizes Jewish history and Jewish culture is that we said no to false gods. We are the iconoclasts of history. Therefore, all those who long for absolute power, all those who long for domination, all those who long to be in some way above human frailties and human dignity, and whatever that is entailed, cannot bear and tolerate a Jewish nation. Therefore, Hitler's plan for world conquest and the
He never
deification.
succeed because the Jews
As
would be a
long as
block.
the Jews are there. Stalin could not succeed as long as the Jews are there. And therefore, always the Jews are the permanent enemies and threat to human beings who seek to deify the state or deify their own power. And this is, Yehudi is kol shekofer b'avodah zarah nikra Yehudi. Anyone who rejects idolatry is a Jew, or anyone who rejects idolatry is as if he embraces the whole Torah. The most crucial commandment in the Bible is that you should not have false gods before me. And therefore, saying no to the false gods, this was the problem in Rome, when the emperor, the worship of the emperor, etc. Now, therefore, tyrannical powers always see in Jews a very suspect people. Haman, the same way. Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh. And Mordechai did not bow down to Haman. And as a result of that, he says to his wife, everything I have is nothing as long as I see the Jew around. Now, the Jew robs the despot, the tyrannical...
Of a clean sweep.
Of a clean sweep. He can't control it all.
So basically, this is what you consider anti-Semitism. It's anti-Semitism.
Yeah, well, I would say it's not just anti-Semitism. It is, in a deeper sense, it's the war against people who will reject the false gods of history. And therefore, any time there will arise a tyrannical power that would claim absolute control over human beings and place themselves above the law and above moral criticism, will always find in the Jewish nation the no-sayers. We are the no-sayers, and therefore we lived on the margins of history. We refuse to give up our very notion of divinity, the God who cannot take a human form, the God who's other than any human institution. And therefore there's no picture of God, there's no form of God. God is always other than whatever human beings will achieve. So everything is relativized in the presence of God. Nothing is given absolute, permanent value. In other words, the only ultimate absolute value is God, and therefore that relativizes any attempt to give absolute value
to
anything else. And that's the destiny of the Jew. And that's the soul of the Jewish people. We worship the unseen God.
And Hanukkah takes us out of the fact that we were a people of the book and brought us into soldiering.
That's correct. That's what it meant for Israelis. You should know, when Israelis came back to their country, this was a major revolution. To live here, a people changed the destiny of history. They were no more victims of history. They decided to be people who shaped their own history, self-determining nation. You know what it means to change 2,000 years of teaching in which you said and you taught your children and you believed that ultimately we are in exile because of our sins. We're in exile because God wants us to be here. And therefore you have no right to rebel against that condition of exile. And young Turks who grew up in the experience of the Soviet Union saw the whole experience of Russia and seeing the vulnerabilities of their people and the shifts that one time if the government is nice, everything's okay, and if the church was nice to us for 1 year, then it's okay, then who knows what's going to be the next year. And to suddenly be subject to the whims of powers beyond yourself and being manipulated and abused. Young revolutionaries said we have to change history. Exile, homelessness is not a necessary condition. It is a condition of history through politics, and we can change it. And therefore, to believe that you can change your fate was a major revolution. And that was a major change in Jewish consciousness. And whenever I live here, sometimes when I forget the importance of this, I realize we take Israel for granted. We don't realize what a major change has taken place in Jewish consciousness. What has taken place is the feeling that we can shape our own history. We can shape our own lives. We're not just victim to forces beyond ourselves. We're not just manipulated. We're not just objects that the world can play with. We can determine our own fate as much as it's possible for any nation to determine their own fate. Now what happens, Leon, is they come back and they face an important question. In order to be able to build a nation and to be in the Middle East, the Arab world did not say, welcome Jews, we waited for 2,000 years for you to come back. Isn't that nice? Let's eat falafel together and sing the Horah together. That's not what happened. They realized, and Ben-Gurion understood, that unless Israel is a people that can fight and defend itself and defend its will to have a home, there will not be a home. Power invites discussion. Weakness invites violence. You see, if you talk to someone out of weakness, then it invites violence. But if you talk to someone out of power, then the person knows it's in his best self-interest to talk to you. So
Eliezer Weitzman, by the way, made this point to me the other day. There's the opening of the Zionist conference here, and basically you see Jews from all over the world coming and sitting there and trying to find out basically what Zionism is today and tra-la-la-la. But you see a guy from Kazakhstan, you see someone else from Australia, another guy from New Zealand. We're Jewish because we believe in this Bible and faith and values and system, but basically I might have more in common with Joe O'Leary in New York, except that he wasn't born Jewish. Weitzman's theory is that the army is able to unite these people. That's where the Jewish feeling, the tradition seems to come together. It's his theory.
No, it's not true.
Oh, well, that's his
I
theory.
know, I understand. That's what was Ben-Gurion's hope, that the army would be the socializer and the unifier of the society. It's not anymore. Although it's an important feature of it, I don't deny its importance. But you see, when Israelis came, they needed an image, another type of image. The image of the Jew was the people of the book, the student of the Beit Midrash, the one who learned.
Meek.
It was the Jewish head. He was known for his humility, his self-effacement, his heroism to continue in spite of all conditions, his love for the word. We were a people centered around a text. We were a text-centered culture. My son-in-law just wrote a book, The People of the Book, that just came out of Harvard University Press, which is a brilliant description of what it means to build a people and a nation and a culture around a book, a discussion around a book. Now we were the people of the book. Now the question is, we became just the book, and Zionism was a revolt against the book, and it said, get into life and let life touch you. Let the real world touch you, and not only, listening to scripture and listening to the sages' wisdom. Now, how do you in some way take a people and make them from the soldier, make them from the student to the soldier? If they looked at Jewish history...
Wasn't that Jabotinsky also?
Yeah, all of them looked for that whole revolution. And therefore, Hanukkah provided them that image. I remember when I came in Aliyah, and they were having a Hanukkah program. And I said, gee, wonderful. Usually when I was in America, there was nothing... My whole Hanukkah was a little menorah in my house. So I had a little light.
No more, by the way.
No more. I mean,
the Hasidic boys have lit them up all over the world.
Well, okay, they even have presidents lighting it up now, I hear. But the point is, so Jews in some way, I always felt the most difficult time for me as a Jew was during Christmas time. Because how could my little Hanukkah menorah compete with a beautiful Christmas tree? And how could I dream of a white Christmas and what? I have a little dreidel.
That's a song, by the way, for a non-Jewish audience.
Couldn't compete with Irving Berlin's I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. So there's always a feeling that I was a schlep.
By the way, before we stop, any connotation there that Irving Berlin, a Jewish writer, wrote the greatest Christmas song?
No, I think that's his great contribution to Western civilization. Jews are always looking to contribute something to others. The other is very important for a Jew, and he wants to enrich other people's lives. And it's just important that he doesn't feel embarrassed when he enriches his own people's lives. Sometimes we feel that,
I didn't mean to embarrass you, but I thought it's an interesting play because the man in the book wrote the music, and he brought the great song, which is the best played record in the world.
So in a sense, when I came here, they said there's going to be a Hanukkah program on TV. I say, marvelous. TV is going to finally resonate. My home is going to be shown on TV. My little menorah is going to get now real showing, a visualization.
Right.
So then I see they're inviting generals for my Hanukkah program. I say, Hanukkah, what does Hanukkah have to do with generals? And the generals start talking about the strategy of Yehuda Maccabee in his guerrilla warfare. And suddenly it becomes then, Hanukkah as a great military strategy of the Jewish people.
Well, it was.
Yeah, but I didn't deny that, but that was not the Hanukkah of a boy growing up in Brooklyn. The boy who grew up in Brooklyn was told, light the Hanukkah menorah and be proud to be a Jew. Put it by your window and don't be embarrassed to be a Jew. Be a public Jew and have faith in the values of your people. So in Brooklyn, the way you were Jewish was through the menorah.
I got you.
Here, suddenly I see Hanukkah becomes the image of the hero, of the fighter. So I said, what happened to my menorah? What happened to my menorah? So in some way I realized that Hanukkah provided for Israelis an image of a Jew who appreciated heroism, who appreciated the art of warfare. So it was not only the Talmudical Academy, the people of the book, but the people of the book could equally as well be the people of the sword. And therefore, how do you merge the sword with the book is the deepest issue today in Israeli society.
All right, we're going to cut for commercial break and see how you do that merger. I mean, this is like a leveraged buyout. Now we don't know where it's going.
Okay.
There's another problem I have in America. I don't know, for some reason, no one eats jelly rolls on Hanukkah. Is there any real significance to that?
I don't know. Maybe they're more concerned about diet
No.
in America. You see,
No.
they're more calorie conscious.
No.
Israelis, in some way, when it comes to Hanukkah, forget that eats sufganiyah is 600 calories. They figure the miracle of Hanukkah is that you can eat a lot of sufganiyah, not gain weight.
All right.
So it's a country of miracles.
Americans don't have that problem. They use potato pancakes. But we'll be right back. This is not a culinary show. This is a deep philosophical show. It's a continuation of Rabbi David Hartman, and it's part 2. So don't leave us. We'll come right back and find out how you merge. It's very important. We're back. We're talking to Rabbi David Hartman, a great Jewish philosopher, leader of the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and a man who is very inclusive of Jews. He's not looking to exclude any Jew, which is very important. He is an Orthodox rabbi. All right, David, let's go back to how we're going to merge the two.
The sword and the book.
The sword of the book.
Well, I think
Other
that's
than in your book, A Living Covenant, which is coming out?
right.
Okay. In January, people can find
Right,
it.
the paperback.
Right.
Jewish Lights is publishing it. I would say that this is the struggle in this country. In other words, is the enemy only an external enemy? In other words, we have power is understood today, and even in the Maccabean, to overcome the enemy who wants to cause my destruction. But there's another enemy that you have to overcome. That's the rashness, the aggression in your own soul. And the Talmud always taught, Eza Gibor HaKovesh et Yitzro. Who is the hero? Who is the mighty person? A person who can subdue his passions, who can control his temper, who makes room. In other words, strength is not only something that takes place in relationship with the enemy outside, but there's an enemy inside that has to be controlled. Self-control. Inner discipline. Learning to not react to people who upset you in such a way that you want to take revenge. Learning to forgive. Forgiveness is also a form of power. It's another form of power.
You have systems that do that. You have biofeedback that can do that for you.
I don't know. I don't think it's
you have yoga.
Yeah, yoga is helpful, but I think that this spiritual exercise, in other words, the inner life and the outer life, sometimes have been seen as two polarized frameworks. That's the people of the book are the people who develop an inner life, and the people of the sword who are concerned with the overcoming the external enemy. Now that polarization has to be overcome. I feel that power over the enemy has to lead to eventually the power of the soul, the power of the spirit, in terms of the inner power of a human being. And that's why the menorah went together. The lighting of the menorah, Hanukkah, went together with the story of the Maccabees. Military victory and rededicating your spiritual temple were joined together into one story.
But you're saying something more important. It's a must that they come together.
They must.
You can't have one military or just book.
Right.
They must come together.
They must.
Otherwise, you don't have a fulfilling Jewish life.
And you don't have a fulfilled human being.
Okay.
In other words, the human being who in some way speaks of an inner life but can't protect himself from external enemies, or a person who sees the enemy always as the one outside and doesn't know how to control his own inner life, is an incomplete person.
But you bring that into Judaism.
Yeah, I think that's fundamental to Judaism. I think that's the revolution of Israel. Israel has restored a new higher unity of the Jewish soul. We're not just one-dimensional. Israel has introduced complexity into Jewish identity. In other words, Jews do many things now. It's not just students or businessmen. There is a sense now that a great hero, my own son-in-law who was a great pilot, was also a very deeply spiritual person. And therefore power is a very important feature of what it means to be a human being. Now, in Israel, we have the struggle. You have sometimes the Haredi, the right-wing Orthodox community, who doesn't want to serve in the army. And they feel that their whole occupation is with Torah. And they are students. They're saving the country by studying Torah. Right. And let the other people fight. Now, the whole polarization between those who fight and those who in some way study has to be overcome, and there are.
Haredi would not be fulfilled human beings.
That's correct.
And they would not be fulfilled Jews.
Because they're parasitical on others, you see. They only live here because there are others who are prepared to really risk their lives to protect them. And therefore you can't build a moral personality who's parasitical on someone else. If you have to do my dirty work for me, then in some way I am a vulgar human being. In other words, if what I'm asking you to do I feel is important in order to survive, then I have to be prepared to do it myself. And you can't have others fight for you. And this is kills the society here. There's a hatred going on in Israeli society between those who they identified as the carriers of religion, and their kids don't serve in the army. Their kids don't in some way share in the burden of the struggle to be a free people in this country.
All right, so I have another question. Are American Jews parasitical because they don't fight for Israel?
Well, they don't live here. You see, this is the thing that is the deepest...
It's a good question.
Yeah,
though.
no, I think it's a very serious question. American Jews love Israel because for many, many reasons. Because it's the carry of Jewish history, it's the carry of their memory, it has in some way restored them.
It's an insurance policy against...
But that's a minor insurance policy. I want you to know, because if the world goes bad, then Israel's not safe. Israel is safe as long as America is a very decent, moral country. And therefore, if America would turn into a vicious country, then Israel would not be safe either. So I never view the theory of the insurance policy.
Okay.
I think Israel is much more important because it has given Jews a sense of history, a sense of memory, and a potentiality to deliver, to prove that we are a people that can build a different society. See, all along we've given sermons about the Jewish people could be. I once said, I remember I was in Columbia University, I don't know if I mentioned the last program, and I said, you know, when I come to America, I sometimes understand why there's anti-Semitism. They said, why? I said, because I hear sermons from rabbis who say that the Jews have an answer. Judaism has the answer for all political, moral problems in the world. Everything is there. If you just know how to tap into this tradition, there would be an answer for every problem in life. I say, here America is struggling on the whole question of the inner city, urban renewal, poverty, Vietnam. And Jews are quiet and they don't give all the answers to them. So I can understand why the Goyim hate them. You know what I mean? I don't have all the answers. You see, it was easy to think I had all the answers when I lived in the diaspora. When I came to Israel, I discovered that the Jews don't have all the answers, and that we have serious problems of how do you build a state, how do you build power, how do you build a military industry and not trade with South Africa and the apartheid. Because you can't have a military army without a military industry. You can't have a military industry unless you find markets for your arms. And therefore markets could be South Africa. So here we see ourselves as a moral people and we're selling arms in apartheid. In other words, the type of compromises you have to, enter into when you build a state. You see,
I understand.
There's a difference between Judaism as a sermon. Very easy to give sermons, Leon. I gave sermons for 20 years.
I never listened.
You don't listen. That's the time to relax and
Right.
chew. Okay, but I'm saying I gave sermons. It's easy to give sermons. It's easy to talk about the ethics of Judaism. It's easy to talk about morality. If you don't have your hands dirty, if you don't have to deal with the problems of power, minority rights, and all the other issues that really rack the brains of every country in the world.
I say it as a joke, but it's not a joke. Because I've always felt sermons in the United States were not that meaningful to me. I prefer to read a book at that moment and do my own inner sermonizing. Because a sermon, and I don't want to go into the whole theory of sermons, because it's not important here. We have much more important issues. But I think that we all have to find our own repository and our own depository. And what you're saying is you don't have all the answers, but in Israel you can really work on finding those answers better than any other place in the world.
Because reality challenges me.
Right.
I can't escape into words.
And you don't have the problem of being a Gola Jew. You don't have the problem of being an exiled Jew, a
I have
Nebuch
to
Jew,
apologize.
and a Nebuch Jew, and someone who's apologetic. So here you're ingrained with strength because you're in a Jewish homeland. You don't have that outside contribution, or it's not a contribution, destruction. And so you have a chance to awaken your soul and your part. And
You have a chance
this
to
is
give
really the meaning of Israel to you.
That's correct. The meaning of Israel to me is the opportunity, not the promise of success. The opportunity to show that Judaism is a way of life, not a way of what you do in the kitchen or what you do in the synagogue. It's a way of life affecting every aspect of human life.
How do you bring that together with your orthodoxy? Because a lot of rabbis certainly don't feel your way. I mean, we interviewed Rabbi Ravitz today, and it's a totally different...
Well, he has not entered the modern world yet. In other words, to him, modernity is, in some way, it has a different conception for him.
Right.
Now, for me, Israel is not the promise of redemption. Israel is the promise of opportunity. I don't know if we're going towards the Messiah. I don't see this as Hatchalta de Gula, the beginning of redemption. I see it as a country that has given the opportunities of Jews to put up or shut up.
All right.
Put up.
But Rabbi, we know that modernity to the Orthodox Jews brings fear. We talked about it on the last program. Is there a way to overcome that fear?
By developing intelligent Jewish understanding. Building rich Jewish lives will overcome the terror. See, if you're innerly secure and you're innerly humble, you could live with modernity. If you think you always have to be certain, if you think you always have to have the answer, then you can't live in modernity.
Can you live a fruitful life if you think that way?
I think it's the only way to live a fruitful life.
No, I'm talking the other way. If you always have to
you
have
have to
an answer.
block, you have to have the answer, you have to always be certain. And people are scared of me because they're afraid that I create doubts. And my view is that Maimonides created the perplexed Jew. He wanted the person to become perplexed, to live with tensions and to live with contradictions and then to develop something richer. If you're not prepared to go through the dark night of the soul, if you're not prepared to face the problems of doubt and uncertainty, then you become a one-dimensional person, flat, not rich, not complex. What happens to a marriage when it faces the complexities and conflicts between two people? It becomes richer. No, the ability to deal with conflict is a dimension of richness to a family, to a child, to a husband-wife relationship. And if you want to sort of live, don't raise any conflicts. No, don't raise any problems. Let's live quietly. So that's, you live quietly, in one place, Leon, right? When you enter the cemetery,
Mount Herzl.
I want you to know, in the cemetery, there's no conflicts. And therefore, I don't want an orthodoxy that walks around, like I said to you once, the rabbi meets someone and says, I have an answer, what's your question? I don't want to walk around with a person dripping from answers.
I went to a party last night in Israel, some very good friends of mine, and some fella brought up a question about Yehuda Maccabee. And it happened to be that his mother was a very Orthodox woman, but not a very knowledgeable woman. And she screamed at him, why do you always have to ask questions?
Yeah, that's right.
And now if you take your theory,
on the country,
he is really the religious Jew because he is asking and she is out of it. Totally.
Yeah, let me tell you something about Israel also, which is an interesting thing. People feel that in some way, if you're religious, then you have no conflicts. You have, everything is, you're walking in
the Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah, the table is set for you. Everything is planned for you. It's Almei Menuchot Yin Haleni. You're going to walk on the straight, quiet paths of life.
Right.
And in Israel, the term used for a person who becomes observant is a choser b'tshuva, which return to repentance. But tshuva also has double meanings. It means turning. It also means answers. And a person who's some way becoming secular, they call him a choser b'she'elah. He's now turning into questions. So I said that's a strange way of describing a religious and non-religious person. The religious person is tshuva, answers. The non-religious person is she'elah, is questions. And I said that's a very strange...
In your system, he's a religious
On
Jew.
the contrary, if you have no questions, if you have no doubts, then you'll never develop a very spiritual personality. Abraham, what did he do? He questioned God. He said, shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? Right. I mean, he lived with demand. He didn't live with... just simple, straight answers all the time.
It's a fantastic theory. We got to cut for a commercial break to allow our people to digest this philosophy. It's fascinating. It's obviously interesting, and it's scintillating. And tomorrow morning when you eat your cornflakes, think about it. The man who asked the question is really a religious Jew, and the one who thinks that he has all the answers is a non-religious Jew. You're going to get perplexed about this, and if you get perplexed, you'll buy the rabbi's books. But it's a great philosophy and a very encouraging one for those people who have an intellectual curiosity and want to have a sense of values, modernity, and ethics. So we'll be right back. This is not a preacher show. This is Leon Charney Report with the Hartman tapes. We're back. We're speaking with David Hartman, the great philosopher, a great philosopher in the city of Jerusalem, Israel, which is a repository for a place of thought. Now, if this is too heavy for you, too fast, we'll slow down. But I think it's important for you to understand, and this is for Jew and non-Jew alike, because we do broadcast to a lot of non-Jews, that this type of philosophy only makes the world better. It makes the Jew more accepting of everybody in the world. Correct. Rabbi? Now,
or not frightened of, I don't know, accepting, but not frightened of everyone in the world.
Right. I mean, look, America's a great example
country.
of pluralism and a fantastic country.
I learned pluralism playing basketball at Lincoln Terrace Park in
Tell us
Brooklyn.
a story about Bob Cousy, how you played against Cousy.
I played with him.
With him?
We were very poor. My family would go to the Borscht, to the Borscht Circuit in the Catskills, and we'd leave the concrete jungle of Brooklyn as a child. And I remember we'd be in these kocha lanes, places.
It means a little bungalow colony.
Yeah. And then the Pioneer Country Club was nearby.
An old Orthodox hotel.
Yeah, but it was a nice hotel with a swimming
good
pool.
Ball players.
Yeah, so I went there and started shooting baskets, and they said, maybe you want to play with the basketball team. I said, fine, but only on the condition that my family could use the swimming pool, etc. So I felt, here's this poor kid bringing his family into luxury. So then one time I had to be in New York, and then I come back, and they said, David, and I used to go to the Tamarack Lodge, where Cousy,
Greenfield Park.
Yeah, Greenfield Park. Cousy was playing there for
Holy
Tamarack.
Cross?
He was at Holy Cross then, but he was playing in the Tamarack Lodge for the summertime.
Really?
Yeah, and I used to watch him like with envy to see this great. It was a ballet dance to watch him play. It was just simply a joy for me. Then I come and they tell me, David, I want you to know that we're playing an important team in South Fallsburg, and we asked Cousy to play with us. I said, Cousy is going to play with me, and I'm going to play together with Cousy. It's like someone told me Elijah the prophet just came down. You know what I mean? Cousy is going to play with me. So then I got on the court, and we played like we were playing together all our life. I scored 24, he scored 18.
Really?
It was an amazing night. I mean, I was then made into, a very important figure in Jewish life. The Jewish boy who played with Cousy.
We had the Michael Jackson here of the
Jordan,
yeshiva.
the Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan.
Right.
You like Michael Jordan, by the way?
Yes, I'd love him. He defies gravity. I mean, when I watch the NBA now, it's sort of not fun anymore because I can't recognize basketball that way. These people don't run on the floor; they jump through the air. I mean, the dumps that go on. It's an amazing thing to watch.
Throw some names at you. Carl Braun.
Yeah, I mean,
Max Zaslavsky.
That's earlier. I thought you're talking about now. So
Did you have a basketball career?
Well, I was planning on that, and then I suddenly decided to study Torah. And Yeshiva University, I was a very poor student in high school, and the only way I could get into college was through an athletic scholarship. And Sam Hartstein wanted to build a good basketball team, so they got me into college, in spite of I had miserable marks. I failed twice in high school.
Really?
Failed twice in elementary school.
What high school?
I went to Chaim Berlin. I went to yeshiva. And I remember them telling my mother, Mrs. Hartman, he won't be anything. What you should do is take him to a trade school, let him learn plumbing, let him learn to become a carpenter. Because a mensch wird er nicht sein. I mean,
A human being he won't be.
Right. I mean, a Talmud Chacham, absolutely not. I remember even in my bar mitzvah, my brother, Alav Shalom, gave me a speech 3 days before my bar mitzvah, and I didn't memorize it. I got up before the whole congregation. I couldn't say anything. So I remember saying to my mother, Mrs. Hartman, don't worry, your oldest son, Chatzkel, is a Talmud Chacham, is a scholar, so you can't win it with every kid. So I was the black sheep in the family.
Right.
Oh, what are you talking about? I mean, when I was a kid, I went to school, and they asked me to name vegetables. And I said, Sibboleth. So they said, what is Sibboleth? I said, don't you know what Sibboleth? I didn't know what an onion was. I mean, I couldn't say onions.
But why do you think this happened?
I don't know. I found
Do you think about it?
Yeah, I think about it often. I think, thank God it happened that way, because I remained intellectually curious all my life. School didn't kill me. In other words, I didn't become a kid who learned the discipline of...
So it's interesting. When did you transform? In college?
College. And last year when I met my wife, is when my life changed.
And you met your wife in college?
High school. The last year in high school. The last year in high school is when I suddenly...
It's a story of encouragement for other students.
On the contrary, that's my philosophy, is I always take in kids who have failed in elementary school. In fact, I always tell teachers, never ask... I once invited in Israel to give a talk before the school system of what should be a program for the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah. So they said, what will Hartman say? So I said, you know what you should do for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Don't ask the children to bring their report card of the previous year. Because I always remembered.
Interesting.
I said that, so they looked at me, they thought I was crazy. I said, why? What's so important? I said, because I remember when I entered into a high school class, and I would show them my report card of the previous year. So my math teacher, and I remember when the summer would pass, I said to myself, Hartman, it's about time you became a good student. Stop playing hooking, stop going to the movies, and really sit down and read books and try to do your work. So I remember coming into my math teacher saying to me, Hartman, don't think you're going to make trouble for us as you made for all your previous teachers. So I said, I was ready, there's no hope. I mean, I was already doomed as a bad student. So I always felt that the best thing a teacher could do is forget what he shouldn't bring his previous report card. Let him believe that he can start a new page. And in some way for myself, I always have pity on people who are failures and say, give them another opportunity. Never pigeonhole. In fact, when they gave me IQ tests, friends of mine, I got below normal. And the point is, thank God, that IQ tests didn't define my life and my report cards. In fact, when I did my first English paper in college, Professor Lynn, he asked me, he says, in reading your paper, there's either two possibilities. Did you ever fall on your head as a child? Or were you born in Bulgaria or someplace? I said, no, I wasn't born in Bulgaria, nor did I fall on my head. So he says, I never read a paper with no such English like this. So he says, the only thing you should do is take the Nation magazine and copy it from page to page. Maybe something will rub off. So suddenly I remember we had to do a report on Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. I was captured by it. Amazing. I read, I couldn't put the book down. It had such a pathos on myself. Then I wrote a paper on Crime and Punishment, and I gave it to Professor Lynn. He says, who wrote it for you?
Yeah, who copied it?
Who copied it for you? I said, I did it. He said, I don't believe it. It can't be the same person who did this. I said, but it's true. But he didn't want to give me credit for it because he couldn't believe that change was possible.
Really?
He couldn't believe that a person could suddenly go from a person born in Bulgaria to someone who would write an interesting, intelligent paper on Crime and Punishment. And therefore, my own life has always been a feeling, my life has taught me that you never feel your door is closed. That opportunity and self-growth should always be given to a person. The belief that a human being can change his past has been a leading principle in my life.
It's interesting. Now that we talk about it, you can see how the center of your life changed, how you transformed, and it really relates to your own philosophy.
Yeah, very important. Possibility.
So what happened at Yeshiva University? You became a great student?
I became then, from my basketball scholarship, it was changed into a Talmudic scholarship, and then I went a year to Lakewood Yeshiva to learn with Rabbi Aaron Kotler. I skipped 5 classes and went immediately into Rabbi Soloveitchik and studied with him, fortunately, for 10 years. So in some way, the chance to change my life and give it another direction was always a part of my life. And even the idea of coming to Israel. In other words, my wife always taught me, and she gave me the support to feel that I'm never blocked into what I did in the past. That opportunity and growth, and therefore I went from a rabbi to a philosopher. I did my doctorate when I was already in the rabbinate. At 41, I finished my PhD. So I never went the normal path. And in some way, I never became like socialized as a student. I never paralyzed my imagination. And I always remained, intellectually curious and hungry to learn. Hungry, I always said, I'm so hungry, even a crumb will inspire me. I looked for wisdom.
Did you have that same feeling as youth, which somehow was never caught by teachers at that point, do you think?
Well, the teachers never caught me as a kid.
That's it.
I ran. It was boring. I had miserable teachers.
Interesting.
And my head couldn't be drawn into what they were doing. And I wasn't socialized to be a good student so that I have a good career. The thing didn't grip me. Mm-hmm. It didn't touch me. Basketball did. Playing ball in the streets, running, playing tennis, playing handball, playing punchball was alive. It was vigorous. There was intensity. And then from a good basketball player, from an athlete, I learned to love books.
Fascinating story.
And my life has been one of that. And therefore, in some way, I never accept the status quo. When I came in Israel, they said, Hartman, the things you did in America, you could have done there. This is Israel. In Israel, this is how things are done, kacha. And I remember when I would ask people why, they say kacha. This is how things are done in this country. And and there was always a feeling that this revolutionary country becomes a conservative country. And therefore, there's no change. And I tried in my life here to bring about change, to believe that you could have a legacy of tolerance and pluralism in Jerusalem, the city of fanaticism, and to believe that things can be different. That whole ethos, that tomorrow could be different than yesterday, that your life could take on new directions, and you're not a prisoner of your past, is for me the motto of my life.
It's sacred to you.
It's sacred to me. And it should be sacred to every human being. I always tell couples when they get married. I remember when I was a rabbi, the greatest gift you can give your wife or your husband is not to know them too well. Because if you know them too well, then don't allow them to grow or change in the marriage. Children are known so well by their parents that they have to rebel in order to change. They have to leave home in order to develop. Can you really grow within people who know you? So there has to be a knowing and a not knowing. Because if you know the person too well, you pigeonhole him.
That's true. You need a sense of intrigue. And
you need a sense of surprise. Right. To be surprised by someone you know. To feel that the person you know could surprise you. Because I remember my father used to say to me, and he used to kill me, when hair will grow hair, that's when you'll become a mensch. So I know for my father, there was no possibility. And I mean, when I went to Yeshiva University, and I started learning, people were saying, Hartman, oh, you're Hartman, the basketball player, or you played with Kuzi. And I remember I wanting them to say so much, Hartman, you're a student of Soloveitchik. You're a student. You're not just a basketball player. And I couldn't shake off the image of the basketball player, no matter if I wore shoes and I didn't wear sneakers and etc. In other words, you want to feel that in some way people are prepared to look with you.
Did your father learn to see you develop into an intellectual personality?
He lived to see that in some way I became a rabbi. He used to visit me in my shul.
Did he accept it?
Sure, he accepted it, but he didn't understand it. He didn't, like I always said to my father when I wanted to leave my first pulpit, and I said, Pa, I have to leave because I'm existentially unfulfilled. So my father says, they're not paying you your salary on time? I said, Pa, no. He says, what's happening? The board is giving you tzachas, they're giving you problems? I said, no. And I would talk about the need for fulfillment, the need for greater horizons. For my father, if you can support your family and there was food in the refrigerator, what else do you want from life?
Which brings me to the other point. Does everyone have to feel this type of curiosity, or are they capable of feeling it?
I don't know what people are capable of. I think people have to learn to be surprised at their own possibilities. You see, people are frightened to discover that they have other qualities in themselves. We drown out many dimensions of ourselves as human beings because we don't know how to live with new aspects of our soul and new aspects of our personality. We don't know how to give room for the richness in our lives. We like to pigeonhole people and we like to pigeonhole ourselves. That's why I remember students tell me, am I bright? Am I not bright? Do I have a potential to be? That's the IQ. Don't tell me I have potential. That scares me. I always argued with Martin Buber. Buber loved the story that when Zushya will come to heaven, God is not going to ask him, why wasn't he like Moses? Or why wasn't he like Isaiah the prophet? Or why weren't you like Maimonides? He's going to ask him, why weren't you like Zushya? So Buber would write and say, that's the great humanism of the Hasidic story. I said, on the contrary, it's a very painful story. If God would ask me to be like Moses, at least I know what I'm supposed to be. If he tells me, why weren't you like David Hartman? I never knew what David Hartman could be. That's the most difficult question. You say to a person, be what you can be.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows what he can be. And therefore, what you need to do in life, and therefore we look for people to tell us, who am I? Tell me who am I? Am I bright? Give me my IQ test. And we want tests to measure our intelligence, tests to measure our emotional stability, tests to measure our ability to love, tests to measure our creativity, always tests. And we're frightened to discover elements of non-knowing in ourselves and let life bring forth new aspects. And that's why Israel is so frightening to the Jewish people. Israel is a place where new things surface, and we don't know necessarily the Jew that was typically known in the past. Woody Allen can't come to Israel.
Why?
Because he knew the Jew as, Nebuch. You see, the one who always has to go to a psychiatrist, and all that type of...
People call him a self-hating Jew.
I don't know, he's not self-hating, he's just very limited.
Right.
He's limited in his grasp of the complexity of the Jew. Now the point is this, Israel has unleashed new dimensions that the Jew could express himself in war, in farming, in industry, in medicine, in learning. In many things.
High tech.
Yeah, he can be many things. And therefore being many things is difficult. People prefer a box. And that's why I said you talked to me about the fear of orthodoxy. Orthodoxy sometimes has to have lenses. Orthodoxy could be so rich because it has so much complexity to it. It could be the most secure faith in the modern world. If it only not be constipated, if it only not feel, in a box, it feel that it can breathe the air outside and not feel that it's going to be blown away. Breathe the air of the world. Let ideas of the world enter into your soul. I said to someone, sometimes Orthodoxy gets so paralyzed that they're frightened to make an imaginative mistake. You know, I mean, no one could do anything in life unless you could make a mistake.
All right, what happens to you in the Orthodox community? How are you accepted or rejected?
I would say to you, we have 250 parents wanted to send their children to our school, which we could only accept 50. 4 to each student. In other words, hundreds of serious Orthodox families in Jerusalem want to send their kids to the school that I've built, to the Hartman Institute High School. That means we started with 25 kids in a class, and for 7 years, we just had one class. For the last 3 years, the school has now...
Why is that?
Because people realize that what I have to offer is not frightening. What I have to offer is an intellectual depth and a way of coping with the world intelligently. And that the Judaism they're exposed to is not a Judaism of simple answers. I teach students how to live with complexity. I teach students how to live with Nietzsche, Marx, how to live with ideas in the world and not to be frightened of the world. And therefore parents want to see religious children who are not fanatics. They think their children are going to be religious if they're fanatics, if you close them off from the world. What they're discovering is that you can be a very serious, pious person and be part of the world and not be frightened of the world.
Well, we discussed this in the last show, but let me review it. Rabbi Soloveitchik had a great influence on you, but didn't he in himself keep himself in a box also?
No, not at all.
He expanded?
There was never any idea. The thing that he gave me deeply...
Did you study alone with him or in a class?
In a class. For 10 years, I sat in the front row with him.
Right.
What I gained from him, and I remember writing to him...
Did you become close to him personally, too?
Yes, very close. I was close to him in the sense as a student. He was not a person easy to get close with.
Right, right.
But I loved him very deeply and learned a great deal from him. And what I learned from him is intellectual courage. There was no intellectual timidity in his life. There was no such thing as an idea that was dangerous. I never heard the word heretic. How can you can't read this book?
That's pretty advanced for an Orthodox rabbi, isn't it?
Not only that, for a person who was the major Talmudic scholar of that generation.
Right.
He wrote a letter of recommendation for me to study philosophy.
He told us. At Fordham University.
At Fordham University. Now the point is this. In other words, he gave me an orthodoxy without fear. He gave me an orthodoxy. He didn't give me an orthodoxy. He gave me a love for Judaism. I don't like the terms orthodoxy, conservative, reform. It sounds like Gimbels and Macy's. In other words, in Jerusalem, I don't think in those categories. I think of someone who takes the tradition seriously, who loves the tradition, who wants the tradition to be renewed and recreated. I'm a person who doesn't want to have any labels.
We're going to cut for a break and come back with Rabbi David Hartman and find out how he makes all the Jews feel inclusive, not despite, but with the fact of the fact that he has been ordained by Rabbi Soloveitchik and Yeshiva University, which is a very Orthodox institution, and he'll tell us how he can welcome Reform Jews or conservative Jews and Reconstructionists. We'll be right back. We're back with this astonishing young man, we'll call him a young man, great basketball player, world-famous philosopher called David Hartman. It's part 2 of the Hartman tapes. And as I said in the beginning of the show, we have never had as many requests for a tape of a show as we had with David Hartman. That includes Shimon Peres, Yitzhak Rabin, Ezer Weitzman, Bob Dole. I can go on and on, 9 years. And if you can't find it, by the way, go to our new internet. You'll find out how you can find our tapes. But we have never had such a rush for tapes as we have for David Hartman. And it's unusual, by the way, for us to do 2 hours with anybody. The only person we did do 2 hours, 3 hours with, is a fellow named John Loftus, who wrote this book, The Secret War Against the Jews. And what was impressive to us that he was an Irish Catholic who became absorbed with the fact of how the Jews were, in a sense, I don't want to use the word screwed, but how they were killed in history for different reasons, which you interpret philosophically. All right, let's go on to give our people are waiting for more philosophical understanding from you. How do we bring this pluralism into Israel today? Now, I have attended the World Zionist Congress. I've seen what went on there. An interesting fact, Artsakh, which is a bunch of reform, had the largest voting delegation. Now, it was discounted very much by the Israelis, who think that you can't move away from the traditional Judaism. We spoke to Bobby Brown, who is the advisor on diaspora affairs for the Prime Minister, and he's trying his best. He says by the way, and I want to bring this up with you, that the Ne'eman Committee, which I'm sure you're aware of, which is trying to bring the reform together, is one of the great achievements in the history of Israel. That an Orthodox rabbi can sit with a Reform rabbi or a conservative rabbi and have dialogue. What's your take on that?
I think, that I don't think that the great achievement is still there. I think Israel, as I always distinguish, Israel is a pluralistic country in the sense that it allows people freedom of religion on all levels. In other words, you can have an Orthodox synagogue, a conservative synagogue, Reform synagogue, 3 blocks away Friday night, and different people coming from that synagogue. It's a beautiful thing to see. In other words, on the grassroots level, there is pluralism. There is no pluralism in the state religion. In other words, the state officially only recognizes an Orthodox rabbinate.
That's true.
And therefore, I don't think that there's been a major change in that. I don't think Bakshi Daron still refers to people in the Reform or conservative movement as jokers and as Hellenizers, as people who are bringing about the destruction of
Rabbi
Judaism.
Ravitz on my show said that Reform Jews are not even, I think, a religion or
Yeah,
a sect of Judaism.
yeah. The point is this. I think, my view is, you don't have to agree with someone to talk to them.
Right.
In other words, if you talk to someone, it doesn't mean that you therefore give legitimization.
This is Brown's theory. We got them talking together.
Yeah, but they're not talking to each other. They're not yet. I mean, in the Ne'eman Commission, they're not yet talking to each other. And the point is how you move a society to allow for diversification of faith commitments, and the government is prepared to recognize that. It's very hard for that. I understand Ne'eman. He's saying that in conversions, he doesn't want to see a Jewish people divided along the lines that this one says you're not a Jew because you went through an improper conversion. In other words, I don't want to talk about the political solution of the conversion
but
issue.
let's get practical. How do you find what would you do as a rabbi with this conversion bill?
No, I think the conversion bill would be catastrophic.
Really?
It would be catastrophic if they pass it. Because Israel is the home of all the Jews. I wrote about this and I've been criticized by that. What keeps
by
Jews...
whom?
By some
Orthodox?
right-wing Orthodox. I said what keeps us Jews together today is not Torah, is not the religion, it is a sense of family. It's the feeling that this is my people, my community. I say, I don't mean that is, I celebrate that. I feel that's enough. I think without Torah, I think we don't have a future. The issue is who interprets the Torah and how is the Torah applied to life? That's an open-ended issue. I'm prepared to develop frameworks which keep the thing loose and vague. I don't want, at this time in history, you asked me how do I create a philosophy of inclusiveness? By developing a philosophy of vagueness. See, there is times in life when you have to be very clear, and there are other times in life when you have to be vague. Now we need general principles that in some way define the Jewish people. Shared destiny, shared commitment to the well-being of the whole community, shared feeling that the spiritual tradition of our people should be a frame of reference that we negotiate with. In other words, I'm not asking a person to sign, when he starts studying Torah, how much of this Torah he's going to observe. What I ask him is to face the tradition seriously and to look at it.
So under your theory, can a Reform rabbi interpret that vagueness? Can a conservative rabbi interpret that vagueness?
Well, I think this is what I'd like to talk to them about. I would like to ask the Reform movement to issue the following challenge. What are the minimal conditions that you believe necessary for a person to enter into this community? Are there any demands that you make on your congregation? What are the things you expect them to do? Is there a concept of mitzvah in your community? Is there a demand? Or is it open-ended and you can choose anything you want? Or you don't have to choose anything? The point is that I think that we can argue with them. And I would say to the Reform movement, unless you develop a conception of mitzvah, you're not going to be able to sustain your community religiously. And in some way, I would say to the conservative movement, can you tell me, how do you interpret the tradition?
Rabbi, you won't believe it. We're out of time. And we all, our crew and everybody, are very unhappy because they love listening to you and they love sharing with you. And they're not fearful to hear you. And if next week they become Bal Tshuva, then I will be...
I want them to be Choser B'Sheila. I want them to ask questions.
So we ask our people who watch us to be Choser B'Sheila, which means be inquisitive and be inquiring and live life according to at least Rabbi David Hartman tells you to live that way.